All right, get ready because today we're going to dive deep into quantum physics, but with a twist.
A twist.
Yeah. Apparently you can simulate like a whole universe worth of physics using just one qubit.
Sounds a little crazy, right?
It does. But that's what this paper is all about. It's called Parity-Time Symmetric Holographic Principle.
Published just last week in the journal Entropy.
And we are going to break it all down.
Figure out how this qubit hologram thing even works.
Yeah, how can one tiny qubit simulate these giant systems? And like, why should we even care?
Well, imagine studying really complex phenomena, like how neutrons scatter, or how these bizarre particles called Majorana zero modes just appear.
And all without a giant quantum computer.
Right. That's the potential of this idea.
Okay, let's get into it. The paper starts with a simple physics analogy.
Yeah.
Imagine this single particle, a fermion, just moving in one dimension.
Like a tiny bead on a wire.
Exactly.
And that bead can move left or right. The paper says you can map these two possible states, left or right, onto a single qubit.
Oh, I see. So we're using the qubit to represent which way our little particle's moving.
Yeah, like a qubit can be in a superposition of states, right? Kind of like a coin spinning in the air before it lands on heads or tails.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then they make things more complicated. They give the particle mass.
And that's where the fun begins. Adding mass actually creates something called an avoided crossing in the particle's energy levels.
Avoided crossing.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you had two roads merging, but instead of crashing, they veer away from each other at the last second.
Okay, but why are these swerving energy levels important?
Well, they're everywhere in physics. Avoided crossings. They show up in atomic physics, condensed matter physics, even in how light behaves.
Wow, so they're kind of a big deal.
Yeah, they're fundamental. A fundamental feature of how energy levels interact with each other.
Okay, so avoided crossings are important. Got it. But how do we get from there to a single qubit simulating an entire universe? It's a big leap.
It's all about how we think about time and space. Usually, physicists describe these avoided crossings using time as the independent variable, right? They look at how the system changes over time.
Right.
But this paper flips the script.
Flips the script how?
They ask, what if we use space as the independent variable instead of time?
So instead of watching things change over time, we're looking at how they change as we move through space.
Exactly. It's a change in perspective.
Okay, I think I'm following.
And when you make that switch, our usual Hamiltonian, the one that describes how a system evolves over time,
Right.
it gets replaced by something called an effective Hamiltonian.
Effective Hamiltonian.
Okay. And this effective Hamiltonian, it describes how the system changes over space.
It's like we swapped out the instruction manual instead of how to change over time. Now we've got how to change over distance.
Exactly.
But what's so special about this effective Hamiltonian?
Well, this is the key. This effective Hamiltonian is what we call non-Hermitian, which means it doesn't follow the usual rules of probability conservation.
Okay, non-Hermitian, so things can get a little weird.
Yeah, things get a little unpredictable. And it means that the way our qubit evolves in time under the influence of this non-Hermitian Hamiltonian, it can actually encode information about how a system is behaving across space.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the qubit's evolution in time? It's like a map, a blueprint for what's happening spatially.
Precisely.
That's cool.
And that's the whole idea behind the qubit hologram. It's like the qubit's behavior over time is like a holographic projection of the spatial solution to a physics problem.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, it's like watching a 2D movie that somehow contains all the information of a 3D world.
Seriously mind-blowing. So they actually use this to tackle a real physics problem, right?
They do. They looked at neutron scattering, which is basically firing neutrons at a lead nucleus and seeing how they bounce off.
So kind of like subatomic billiards?
Exactly.
Okay. But how does the qubit hologram help with that?
Well, they showed that you can map this complex scattering problem with all its nuances onto the time evolution of a single qubit.
So it's like the qubit is doing a little dance that represents the whole scattering process.
I like that, a little dance. You can actually visualize it on what's called the block sphere.
Block sphere.
It's a sphere where each point represents a possible state of the qubit. And as the qubit evolves in time, it traces out a path on the sphere.
Okay.
And that path, according to the paper, corresponds to the solution to the neutron scattering problem.
Whoa, so we're drawing a picture of the scattering process, but using the qubit's evolution on the block sphere.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But did they actually, prove it works? It sounds too good to be true.
They did. They actually ran simulations and compared the results to experimental data. And guess what? It matched up perfectly.
No way.
Yeah, the qubit hologram got the scattering patterns right.
So they showed that this crazy idea, the qubit hologram, it can actually solve real physics problems.
It can. It's just the beginning. The paper focuses on a very specific type of problem with certain symmetries,
Right.
but it opens a whole new way of thinking about quantum simulation.
This is amazing. It's like we can simulate huge, complex systems using way fewer resources than we thought.
And they didn't stop there. They also used this qubit hologram to simulate something even weirder.
Weirder than a qubit simulating a whole scattering process. What could be weirder than that?
A Majorana zero mode.
Oh, yeah. We talked about those earlier. The particles that are their own antiparticles, right?
Right?
The ones that sound like they came straight out of Star Trek.
Exactly. And simulating these Majorana zero modes is a huge deal because they are supposedly the key to building really powerful quantum computers.
Oh, wow. The kind that could, like, revolutionize medicine, right?
And
Material science.
exactly. So these Majorana zero modes are important, not just for understanding fundamental physics, but for building the future of quantum computers.
So how on earth did they simulate them using just one qubit?
Well, remember that non-Hermitian effective Hamiltonian, the one that describes how the system changes over space?
Right, right.
Well, it turns out it's also really connected to something called PT-symmetry.
PT-symmetry. Another one of those terms that makes my head spin.
It basically says that if you look at a system in this special mirror, that reflects space and reverses time. If it looks the same, then it has PT-symmetry.
So it's like a cosmic balancing act.
I like that, a cosmic balancing act.
But how does that tie into the qubit hologram and these Majorana particles?
So this is where it gets really interesting. The paper shows that the transition between unbroken and broken PT-symmetry corresponds to what's called a topological phase transition.
Topological phase transition.
Yeah, it's like the system is undergoing a fundamental shift, kind of like when ice melts into water.
Okay, I can picture that.
And at the boundary between these two phases, something magical happens. A Majorana zero mode pops into existence.
No way. It's like it's born out of this breaking of symmetry.
It is, and the fact that we can simulate all of this, the appearance of these exotic particles, using just one qubit.
That's just crazy.
It is. It's a testament to the power of the qubit hologram.
I need to know, how did they actually pull this off? How do you program a single qubit to mimic this whole phase transition and create a Majorana zero mode?
Well, they use this really clever technique called the shooting method. Imagine you're trying to hit a target with an arrow. You adjust your aim, shoot, see if it hits the bullseye. If it misses, you adjust and shoot again.
So they're basically aiming the qubit at a target.
Yeah, and the target is the Majorana zero mode. They start with a guess for the qubit's initial state. Let it evolve under the influence of this special Hamiltonian, and see if it ends up in a state that corresponds to a Majorana zero mode.
So it's like a quantum guessing game. But how do they know if they've hit the jackpot?
They can tell by analyzing the final state of the qubit, if it has certain properties, signatures that are unique to Majorana zero modes. Then they know they've successfully simulated it.
So it's like the qubit is sending them a secret code, and they've figured out how to read it.
I love that, a secret code. And remember, this is all happening with just one qubit.
Okay, I'm still a little confused. We're talking about things in space, like where particles are. But how do they capture that spatial information? Using just one qubit, evolving in time.
Well, this is where things get even more clever. They introduce a spatially varying mass.
A spatially varying mass. Isn't mass supposed to be, like, constant?
It does sound strange, but in this model, it's a way to represent the changing properties of the system as we move through space.
Okay, so they're using this changing mass to, like, put the spatial information into the qubit's time evolution.
Exactly.
It's like they folded space into time.
They kind of did. And, they even hint at how you could extend this to simulate problems in even higher dimensions.
Like 3D, the world we live in.
Yeah. They say that systems with a certain kind of symmetry, called p-symmetry, they have a very specific connection to PT-symmetric dynamics in the qubit hologram.
Okay, so more symmetries. P-symmetry, PT-symmetry. I'm learning a whole new language.
More, and it's a language that's unlocking some pretty deep secrets about the universe. P-symmetry basically means if you flip all the spatial coordinates, the system looks the same, like looking at it in a mirror.
Okay.
And what the paper suggests is that this p-symmetry, when you translate it into the language of the qubit hologram, it shows up as PT-symmetry.
So we're going from a spatial symmetry to a space-time symmetry, all within this qubit hologram framework.
Exactly. And it means that all these principles we've been talking about, the non-Hermitian Hamiltonians, the PT-symmetry,
Yeah.
they might actually apply to a whole range of systems in higher dimensions.
Wow. We might be on the verge of simulating entire universes using just a few qubits.
We might. This is really groundbreaking stuff. But before we get carried away with dreams of simulating entire galaxies, let's take a step back and consider what this all means.
Yeah, let's pause for a second. What does this qubit hologram tell us about, reality? Is information really a fundamental part of the universe? Are space and time just illusions?
Those are big questions, and we'll tackle them in the last part of our deep
I
dive.
can't wait. But for now, let's just appreciate the wonder of this qubit hologram.
It really is amazing. It reminds us that the universe is full of surprises, and the human mind is capable of understanding things far stranger than we could have ever imagined. Welcome back. So we left off with a big question. How can a single qubit possibly simulate something as bizarre as a Majorana zero mode?
Yeah, my head is still spinning from that last bit.
Yeah.
The qubit acting like a chameleon, changing its state to match the entire system. But now, Majorana zero modes. These things are like the unicorns of the particle world, right?
They are pretty strange. Their own antiparticle. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing yourself, but also your complete opposite at the same time.
And they're important for building those super powerful quantum computers.
Exactly. The kind that could change everything. Medicine, materials science, so much potential.
Okay, so Majorana zero modes are important, I get it, both for understanding fundamental physics and for building the future. But how in the world did they manage to simulate them using just one qubit?
Well, remember we talked about that non-Hermitian effective Hamiltonian, the one that describes how the system changes over space?
Right, vaguely.
Well, it turns out that this Hamiltonian is deeply connected to something called PT-symmetry.
PT-symmetry, another one of those terms that makes me feel like I need a physics degree.
Basically, it's like this. Imagine a mirror. But this mirror, it reflects space, but it also reverses time.
Okay.
If the system looks the same in this special mirror, then we say it has PT-symmetry. It's perfectly balanced between space and time.
So PT-symmetry, it's kind of like a cosmic balancing act.
I like that, a cosmic balancing act.
But how does this tie into the qubit hologram
Yeah.
and these Majorana particles?
Here's where things get really interesting. The paper shows that the transition between unbroken and broken PT-symmetry,
Unbroken and broken.
yeah, it actually corresponds to what's called a topological phase transition. It's like the system's going through a fundamental shift in its structure.
Kind of like ice melting into water.
Exactly. And at the boundary between those two phases, something magical happens.
Magical.
Yeah, a Majorana zero mode just pops into existence.
Whoa, so it's like born from this break-in symmetry.
It is. And the fact that we can simulate all of this, the appearance of these exotic particles,
Yeah.
all using just one qubit, it's just mind-blowing.
It really is. Okay, so how do they actually do it? How do you program a qubit to mimic this whole phase transition and make a Majorana zero mode?
They use a technique called the shooting method. Imagine you're trying to hit a target with an arrow. You adjust your aim, you shoot, see if it hits the bullseye. If you miss, you adjust again and shoot another arrow.
Oh,
So in this case, they are kind of aiming the qubit at a target. And the target is the Majorana zero mode. They start with a guess for the qubit's initial state, let it evolve under this special Hamiltonian, and they see if it ends up in a state that corresponds to a Majorana zero mode.
so it's like a quantum guessing game. But how do they know when they've actually found it? The Majorana zero mode, I mean.
They look at the final state of the qubit. If it has certain properties, certain signatures that are unique to Majorana zero modes, then they know they've got it.
So it's like a qubit sending them a secret code, and they've figured out how to crack it.
That's a great way to put it. A secret code. And this is all happening with just one qubit.
I know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. We're talking about things in space where particles are. But how do they get that spatial information? Using just one qubit evolving in time.
Well, they introduce a spatially varying mass.
Wait, a changing mass? I thought mass was like a constant.
It is strange. But in this model, it's a way to represent the properties of the system as you move through space. They are basically changing.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So they use this changing mass to encode the spatial information into the qubit's time evolution.
Exactly. It's a very clever trick.
It's like they folded space into time. Amazing.
It is. And the really exciting part is they suggest that this whole technique could be used to simulate problems in even higher dimensions.
Wait, you mean like 3D, the kind of world we live in?
Yeah. They point out that systems with a certain symmetry, called p-symmetry, have a very specific connection to those PT-symmetric dynamics in the qubit hologram.
Okay, more symmetries.
Not to forget-
P-symmetry, PT-symmetry. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it's all connected. P-symmetry basically means if you flip all the spatial coordinates, the system looks the same, like looking at its mirror image.
Okay, I get that.
And what this paper suggests is that P-symmetry, when you translate it into the language of the qubit hologram, it becomes PT-symmetry.
So we go from spatial symmetry to a space-time symmetry, all within this qubit hologram framework.
Exactly, and that means all these principles we've been discussing, the non-Hermitian Hamiltonians, PT-symmetry, and so on, they might actually apply to a whole bunch of systems in higher dimensions. We might be able to simulate entire universes using just a handful of qubits.
Okay, I need a minute to process all of this. A lot to take in.
It is. But this qubit hologram idea, it's not just some theoretical curiosity. It could completely change how we study and understand the universe, from the tiniest particles to the largest structures.
It's like we've stumbled onto a whole new way of looking at reality.
I agree. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's think about the bigger picture. What does this tell us about the nature of space and time? Is information truly fundamental? Are we living in a hologram? Those are some big questions.
They are. And we'll try to tackle them head on in the final part of our deep dive.
But for now, let's just savor the wonder of this qubit hologram idea. It really is a reminder that the universe is full of surprises.
And that the human mind is capable of figuring out things so much stranger than we could have ever imagined.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the show. We've been talking about this paper that says a single qubit can act as a hologram for an entire physical system. It's a wild idea.
It is, and we've seen how it works, how they used it to simulate some pretty complex stuff, like neutron scattering, even those Majorana zero modes.
The particles that are their own antiparticles. It's crazy.
It is. We even touched on how this qubit hologram could be used to simulate even higher dimensional systems, maybe even getting a peek at how our own 3D world might be encoded in a lower dimension.
Yeah. But for this last part, I want to take a step back from all the technical stuff and think about the bigger picture. What does this research tell us about the universe?
It really does raise some profound questions, like if we can store spatial information in the time evolution of a qubit, does that mean space and time aren't as separate as we thought?
It's like we've always seen them as two separate things, right? Space and time, two threads in the fabric of reality. But maybe they're more intertwined than we realize.
Like, think about watching a movie. It's a 2D projection on a screen, but somehow that flat image has all the information you need to see a 3D world, with depth, movement, everything.
So you're saying the qubit's evolution in time, that 1D line on the block sphere, it's like the movie screen. And somehow it contains a whole extra spatial dimension.
Exactly. The qubit hologram could be a hint that our idea of space and time is just that, an idea. There might be a deeper level of reality where these concepts aren't so clear.
Whoa, okay, so this isn't a totally crazy idea?
Yeah.
I mean, there are other areas of physics that suggest something similar, right?
Absolutely. There's the holographic principle, this mind-bending idea from string theory. It suggests that our whole 3D universe might actually be encoded on a 2D surface, like a hologram.
So this research, it could be like a concrete example of how that would actually work, how information from a higher dimension could be projected onto a lower one.
It's possible. And it makes you think about information itself. If we can store the blueprint of a physical system in the way a qubit changes over time, what does that even mean? Is information just a way we describe the world? Or is it a fundamental ingredient, like space and time?
It's like saying information isn't just something we create with our minds. It's built into the universe itself.
It's a big question, and physicists are definitely grappling with it. This research on the qubit hologram, it's not just about simulations. It's making us rethink some of the most basic things we thought we knew about reality.
It's amazing to think that something as tiny as a single qubit could hold the key to unlocking these huge mysteries.
It is. But it's important to remember this is really just the beginning. There's still so much we don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot more work to do. Can we scale this up? Simulate even more complex systems? What are the limits?
Exactly. And there are so many questions, like what happens if we lose those special symmetries that make this work? Can we find even better ways to store information in these quantum systems?
It's like we've opened this door to a whole new room in the quantum house. And we have no idea what's inside.
That's science for you. It's a constant exploration, pushing the boundaries of what we know and what we think is possible.
And this qubit hologram research, it's a perfect example of that. It reminds us that even the tiniest things, like a single qubit, can give us clues about the biggest questions.
Absolutely. So, to all our listeners out there, keep asking questions, keep exploring. The universe is full of mysteries just waiting to be discovered.
Maybe one of you listening will make the next breakthrough. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of the qubit hologram. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.